Let me share with you the 3 verses that transform my life and how they can bring hope to yours as we step into a new year, determined to leave debt behind. Type this in the comments. My finances are in God's hands. Proverbs 22:7 reads, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." Those words struck me deeply when I first truly understood them. I had read them before, of course, but never had they resonated so profoundly as they did on the day I decided to confront the weight of my financial struggles. That verse didn't just describe a reality I was living in, it exposed a spiritual truth I had been avoiding. Debt, as the Bible so clearly states, is not just a financial obligation, it's a form of bondage, a chain that ties us to circumstances, people, and systems that control more of our lives than we realize. At that time, I was juggling multiple debts, credit cards, car payments, medical bills. Each one came with its own due dates, interest rates, and relentless demands. The stress was overwhelming, and the guilt was even worse. I felt like I was failing not only in managing my household, but in honoring God. Debt wasn't just affecting my bank account, it was consuming my peace, stealing my joy, and clouding my ability to trust in God's provision. That's when Proverbs 22:7 became a mirror, reflecting the truth of my situation in a way I couldn't ignore. The phrase slave to the lender is not an exaggeration. It perfectly describes the emotional and spiritual toll debt takes. When you're in debt, your choices are no longer fully your own. Every paycheck feels like it belongs to someone else before it even reaches your hands. Decisions about where to live, what to buy, and even how to spend time are shaped by the demands of creditors. The weight of it can be suffocating, making you feel small and powerless. But here's the thing, God didn't create us to live as slaves, not to sin, not to fear, and certainly not to debt. That realization became my turning point. When I finally saw debt for what it was, bondage, I knew I had to treat paying it off as more than just a financial goal. It became a spiritual mission, an act of obedience to God. But I didn't start with grand gestures or unrealistic goals. I started small with what I had. I listed all my debts from smallest to largest and prayed over each one. I asked God to guide me, to give me wisdom and discipline, and then I made a plan, a simple, actionable plan to pay off one debt at a time. The first payment I made felt symbolic, almost like breaking the first link in a chain. It wasn't much, just a small amount toward the smallest debt, but it was enough to shift something in my spirit. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, a glimpse of freedom. With every payment I made after that, I felt God's blessing. The progress was slow at first, but it was steady. And with each debt I cleared, I experienced a lightness I hadn't known in years. The chains were breaking one by one. What I learned during that time is that God doesn't leave us alone in our struggles, especially when we're striving to live in alignment with His Word. He honors our efforts, even the small ones, when they're rooted in faith and obedience. There were times when unexpected blessings came, a rebate I wasn't expecting, an opportunity to earn a little extra money. Those moments felt like God's way of saying, "Keep going, I'm with you." If you're feeling overwhelmed by debt right now, I want you to know that you're not alone. It's easy to feel hopeless, to believe that your situation will never change, but that's not the truth. God's word promises freedom, not just spiritually, but in every area of our lives. Each step you take toward paying off your debt, no matter how small, is a step toward reclaiming your life. It's a step away from the bondage that holds you back and toward the abundant life God has planned for you. Debt doesn't define you, and it doesn't have to control you. Start where you are. Pray for wisdom. Make a plan. Trust that God will guide your steps. Remember, every dollar you put toward paying off debt is more than a financial transaction. It's an act of faith, a declaration that you refuse to live as a slave to anything but God's love and purpose for your life. And as you walk this path, know that God is with you, cheering you on every step of the way. Deuteronomy 28:12 says, "The Lord will open the heavens, the storehouse of His bounty, to send rain on your land in season and to bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none." When I first read this verse, it felt too grand, too far removed from my reality. At the time, I was struggling just to make ends meet, much less imagining a future where I could lend and not borrow. But something about the words stirred my heart. I realized that this wasn't just a promise, it was an invitation to trust God not only with my needs, but with the work of my hands, the efforts I poured into each day, no matter how small they seemed. This verse became my prayer. Every morning before I started my day, I would open my Bible and speak those words aloud. At first, it felt strange. My life didn't look anything like the abundance described in Deuteronomy 28:12. But I kept praying, believing that God's promises are true even when my circumstances don't yet reflect them. I asked Him to bless the work of my hands, to make my efforts fruitful, and to send His rain in season. And while I waited for that rain, I worked diligently, faithfully, as if every task was an offering to Him. One of the first things this verse taught me was to see my work differently. Folding laundry, cooking meals, and even balancing a tight budget weren't just mundane chores, they were opportunities to honor God. I began to approach my job, however humble it seemed, with a renewed sense of purpose. If God had promised to bless the work of my hands, then every task, no matter how small, was part of that promise. That mindset changed everything for me. Work that once felt tedious became meaningful because I knew I wasn't working alone. God was in it with me. And then, little by little, the blessings came. It wasn't a sudden windfall or a dramatic change, but the kind of steady provision that only God can orchestrate. A neighbor needed help with childcare and offered to pay me for a few hours a week. An old hobby turned into a small side income when someone asked if I could bake for a local event. It wasn't much at first, but it was enough. And every time an opportunity came, it felt like a reminder from God. I see you. I'm providing for you. What struck me most during this time was how God's blessings always arrived exactly when I needed them. One month, when an unexpected medical bill threatened to upend my budget, the extra money from my side jobs covered it completely. Another time, a family member gifted me groceries without knowing how bare my pantry was. These weren't coincidences. They were glimpses of the storehouse of God's bounty being opened over my life. This verse also taught me patience. In farming, rain doesn't fall every day. It comes in season, when the crops are ready to grow. In the same way, God's blessings often come in His perfect timing, not ours. That was a hard lesson for me, especially when I felt like I was working so hard and seeing so little return. But looking back, I see how God was teaching me to trust Him, to keep working faithfully even when I couldn't yet see the harvest. If you're praying for financial breakthrough, I want to encourage you, don't underestimate the power of diligent, faithful work. Sometimes we expect God to work in big, miraculous ways, and He can. But more often, His blessings come through the everyday efforts we put forth with a heart of trust. Every step you take, every task you complete with faith and intention is part of His plan to bless the work of your hands. And when those blessings come, they often bring more than just financial provision. They bring a deeper understanding of God's faithfulness, a strengthened trust in His timing, and a renewed sense of purpose. They remind us that we are co-laborers with Him, working together to create a life that reflects His abundance and glory. God's promise in Deuteronomy 28:12 isn't just about money or material wealth. It's about a life of fruitfulness, freedom, and faithfulness. He wants to open the storehouse of heaven for you, to bless your efforts, and to bring you to a place where you can give generously without needing to borrow. So keep praying, keep working, and keep trusting. The rain will come, and when it does, it will be more than enough. Romans 13:8 says, "Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law." When I came across this verse, it felt like God was speaking directly to my heart, offering not just a command, but a vision of what my life could be. By that point, I had already started working toward paying off my debts, but this verse shifted my perspective entirely. It reminded me that financial freedom wasn't the ultimate goal. Love was. Living without the weight of debt wasn't just about having more money in my pocket. It was about creating a life that reflected God's love and allowed me to pour that love into others. This verse became the final piece of the puzzle for me. It was as if God was saying, once the debts are gone, what will you do with the freedom I've given you? That question challenged me. I realized that paying off my debt wasn't just a financial journey, it was a spiritual one. It was about becoming the kind of person who could give generously, serve joyfully, and live with open hands. As I continued working toward financial freedom, I started to notice how my choices rippled out to those around me. Saying no to unnecessary expenses wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. Each decision to spend wisely or go without taught my children lessons in stewardship and gratitude. They saw firsthand that sometimes sacrifices are made not out of lack, but out of wisdom and faith. I explained to them that we were working toward a bigger goal, not just to be free from financial obligations, but to have the freedom to love and serve others fully. The more I focused on eliminating debt, the more I realized how much it had been holding me back. Debt is more than a financial burden. It can weigh on your heart and mind, stealing your peace and narrowing your focus. It keeps you looking inward, preoccupied with your own needs and struggles. But as the debts disappeared, something beautiful happened. My perspective shifted outward. Suddenly, I had room in my life to think about others, not just their needs, but how I could meet them. I'll never forget the first time I was able to give without hesitation. A family in our church was going through a difficult time, and I felt God nudging me to help. In the past, I would have hesitated, worrying about how it might affect my own finances. But this time, there was no hesitation, no fear. I was free. I could respond to God's call with a joyful heart, knowing that the love I was sharing was an extension of His love for me. That moment was worth every sacrifice I had made to get there. Romans 13:8 reminds us that the only debt we should carry is the continuing debt to love one another. This doesn't mean we'll ever fully repay that debt. Love is a lifelong calling, a daily act of surrender to God's will. But what it does mean is that financial freedom is not an end in itself. It's a tool, a means to live out God's purpose for our lives. When we're not weighed down by financial burdens, we're free to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to show His love in tangible ways. God doesn't just want us to live without debt. He wants us to live in abundance, not an abundance of material things, but an abundance of love, generosity, and service. He wants us to be the kind of people who can lend without borrowing, who can give without hesitation, and who can love without limits. That's the kind of freedom He desires for all of us. If you're still working toward financial freedom, I want to encourage you. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Yes, paying off debt is hard work, and it requires discipline and sacrifice. But it's about so much more than just getting your finances in order. It's about creating a life that reflects God's love and makes room for His purposes. Every step you take toward freedom is a step closer to the life He's calling you to live, a life of generosity, joy, and love. When the debts are gone, the real work begins. It's the work of loving others, of serving without strings attached, of living with a heart that is fully surrendered to God. That's the life He wants for you, and it's a life worth pursuing with everything you have. So keep going, keep trusting, and remember that as you work toward freedom, God is working in you, preparing you for the abundant life He's promised. When I finally stopped seeing money as my source and started seeing God as my provider, my financial reality shifted. And that's exactly why I created the Financial Covenant, how to build a pact with God to eliminate debt. This isn't just about budgeting or strategy. It's about creating a personal biblical covenant that aligns your finances with God's abundance. It's about stepping into the divine principles that unlock financial freedom. If you've been praying for a breakthrough but still feel stuck, this is your moment. Click the link in the first pinned comment and start building your financial covenant with God today. Even if you're in a tough spot financially, remember this: the principle of sowing and reaping is always at work. When you take a step of faith, even when it doesn't seem logical, God meets you there. Step into alignment, break the cycle of lack, and start walking in the abundance that is already yours. I want you to hold on to this truth. God has already prepared a way for you. Your financial breakthrough isn't just a hope, it's a promise. When you align yourself with His principles, when you step into covenant with Him, things begin to shift. And I believe that shift is already happening for you. If this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone you love, someone who needs to hear that there is a way out of financial struggle. You never know whose life you might change with just one video. And if you've been blessed by this content, consider becoming a member. It's a way to not only receive exclusive benefits, but also to support this channel so we can keep spreading these messages of faith and financial freedom. Thank you for being here. You are part of something bigger, and I'm so grateful for you.